Welcome back into the Blacksburg Buzz. Today, we're diving deep into the schedule once again for part three, Miami and Stanford. Now, first and foremost, the Hokies, they just have to pull it together this weekend at Old Dominion. They haven't looked like we expected them to early in the season, and at some point, they really just need to put their foot on the gas and get things moving, especially in the first half. They've been so slow to start some games, and you can't do that against good teams, which are coming down the line in the schedule. You've got to pull it together at some point. Now, before we dive into this Miami team, let's talk about today's video sponsor, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of 200K. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. Now, Miami was a decent team last season. They went 7-6, lost to Rutgers in the Pinstripe Bowl, where the Hokies were just a few short seasons ago and ended up losing up there in New York. But Miami, a decent team last year, and this year they look like they're going to be phenomenal. Really the team to beat in the ACC, I think, at this point. They're currently 2-0, and most likely Virginia Tech's going to see Miami 4-0 by the time they host the Hokies in just a couple weeks. They've had some interesting wins and losses last season where they beat out Texas A&M, they beat out Clemson, they put up a great fight against FSU and Louisville, but then they lost to Rutgers, Georgia Tech, and barely beat UVA in overtime. A little bit interesting, but they've made some improvements to the team. And so far this year, they cooked Florida and Florida A&M so far. A combined 97-26 score between those two games. And that ratio, I'm expecting it to grow even more against Ball State coming up this weekend. Just far outmatching this Ball State team. Miami should put up some crazy numbers once again this weekend. Then after Ball State, they've got USF into Virginia Tech and a few potentially tough ACC games down the line, especially Louisville, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. Now, like I said just a moment ago, Miami, they look like the team to beat. I think Louisville's up there as well. There's been a lot of hype around Syracuse and NC State, too. Two teams both that are just looking good so far. I mean, NC State ranked at the moment. So definitely a couple other teams up there in the mix for the meantime. But I really think Miami is that front runner. They just looked so strong in that game against Florida. It was pretty ridiculous. I got to catch the first half, and wow, did Miami look phenomenal in that game. They're a fantastic team, and they're only going to get better with more experience this year. A ton of top players in the conference, top players out of the transfer portal, and that's kind of been a theme for them in recent years. They've made a lot of great pickups in the portal, in recruiting, but they haven't really been able to put it together, and it seems like this is finally the year where they're getting this team to mesh, and they're actually matching the preseason, offseason hype to the product they're putting out on the field, which is a pretty big deal for Miami. Now, some players to look out for this team. First and foremost, it's Cam Ward, the quarterback. Played at Washington State before, a Walter Payton finalist, FCS All-American second team, Conference Offensive Player of the Year last year. Let me just read off a couple stats for you about Cam Ward to put this into perspective. 6.6 yards per carry, 344 and a half passing yards per game at the moment, 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. The dude is nuts. He can seriously just throw the ball from any arm slot under any type of pressure, any sort of motion, whether he's rolling out of the pocket, whether he's planted in there on the run, his feet are set, whatever. Cam Ward has a fantastic arm. He is an uber talented quarterback. And interestingly enough, incredibly nonchalant when he's on the field. He is so fun to watch. The way he combines so much talent, his arm is amazing. And he combines that with the look that he just doesn't care and he's just kind of out there doing his thing. He's so fun to watch and just a ridiculous player. Cam Ward can do just about anything. If he keeps it up this season, he's going to be a top draft pick once the drafts come around. And honestly, if he has a good season, he'll probably be a Heisman contender, if not win it. He's actually that good. If Miami goes out and wins the ACC and makes it to the college football playoff, I see no reason that Cam Ward wouldn't be in at least Heisman contention at that point. He's that good. Cam Ward is phenomenal. He's a guy you have to worry about. Now, in addition to Ward on the offense, you've got Damian Martinez, the running back from Oregon State, a Pac 12 first team 2 times so far, and one of the highest profile transfers over the offseason. So far this season, 26 rushes for 156 yards. That's 6 yards per carry. There are 4 guys that have 5+ yards per carry on this team so far. I know it's 2 games, but still, those are pretty good numbers up until this point. And Martinez, just with him and Ward, you've got a really dynamic duo back there in the field. I mean, that's a lot to worry about. Then when you look at the receivers, Xavier Restrepo, ACC first team, 11 catches for 216 yards. That's 19.6 yards per catch. He also has 2 touchdowns on the season. Insane numbers. You're talking about almost 20 yards per reception for this guy through 2 games. That's crazy numbers right there. He's going to be their dominant guy, and he is rapidly climbing the school's leaderboards in multiple categories. He already has the single season reception record with 85. You got to worry about this guy. Now, 2 other wide receivers as well. Isaiah Horton, 8 catches for 136 yards. That's 17 yards per reception. And then Elijah Arroyo, 5 catches for 106 yards, 21.1 yards per catch. When you've got a talent like Cam Ward leading the offense, throwing the ball, you honestly just have to worry about any guy on the field with a jersey and 2 hands, frankly, because he's going to get them the ball. He's going to put it in a perfect spot, and he's going to do it looking like he doesn't have a care in the world. So you got to worry about, honestly, anyone that can catch the ball on this team. You have to at least be aware of, because when you've got a quarterback that high, just that high of a level, you can't take chances with anyone who can receive the ball. Now, looking at the defense a little bit, Tyler Barron, defensive lineman, has got to look out for 5.5 tackles for loss this season. That's 31 yards negative that he's accounted for. Very impressive stuff through 2 games. 8 total tackles as well. So he has just been pushing back opposing teams' offenses, keeping them at or behind the line of scrimmage. Definitely a guy to be on the lookout for. Also, Ruben Bain, another defensive lineman. He's one of the best young talents in the conference and probably in the country. He won the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. He was on the ACC third team, a freshman All-American. Bain is just nuts, constantly pressuring quarterbacks. He's racking up tackles behind the line, and he will be a problem for the Virginia Tech O-line. I'm not going to say probably will be a problem. He will be a problem. I'm actually really worried about how Virginia Tech's old line can handle Ruben Bain because he's just that good. When you see those stats, when you see him on the field, he is very talented at rushing, and you've got to be aware of this guy at all times. And with how Virginia Tech's O line has played so far this season and all the shifts that we've seen already, they made a lot of adjustments going into the Marshall game. So guys are switching around and not quite comfortable where they're at. I'm really concerned about how that could play into Ruben Bain's attack in this Miami game. Now, there is one thing though, for the Hokies, this could be a benefit for them. We're not quite sure at the moment, but Bain did get injured in week 1 against Florida. I believe it was a calf injury, and they said that he would be out for a couple of weeks. So we don't actually know when Bain's coming back. He did miss that second game against Florida A&M. So we'll see if he does actually play. But certainly, if he does, you need to be on the lookout for number 4 on defense. There's also Jalen Rivers, an offensive lineman, an ACC second team last year, ESPN projected first round pick. Miami looks to have a pretty solid O line. When I watched that Florida game, the Gators were struggling to break through, and on multiple occasions, Cam Ward had just about all the time in the world. You couldn't ask for much more as a quarterback. So Antoine Powell Ryland and the crew, they're going to have their work cut out for them, trying to get some sacks, trying to get some tackles for loss. It's going to be tough with this Miami O-line. This Miami game is a scary game on the schedule. I'm just going to be real. 4 weeks ago, I would have said this is probably going to be a really fun game to watch. It's going to be pretty competitive and could go any way. At the moment now, after seeing the first 2 games for Virginia Tech, I've got Miami winning by a fairly solid margin. Now, don't get me wrong, Tech, they can shift the line back with a good performance against ODU a little bit, but I seriously just think Miami is a more consistent team, especially with the way that they play at such a high level and they play all the time, the full game. So I'm very concerned about this Miami game. If the Hokies start out slow, we're looking at a blowout here. If they start fast and they play a full 60 minutes, we could still see a competitive game. Could. But at this point, we haven't seen Tech play 60 minutes. We just haven't. And until they do that and they show that they can hang with a really solid team, or even just start off really well and play a full, complete powerhouse game against a not so solid team, I just don't have confidence in Virginia Tech at this point to win or compete at a high level against a team like Miami right now. Now, after Miami, you've got Stanford, a very different opponent, a very different matchup here. Stanford was 3-9 last season. They beat Hawaii, Colorado, and Cam Ward's Washington State, interestingly enough. 1-1 so far this season. They beat Cal Poly 41-7, and then they lost TCU by 7. Stanford just isn't a great football team in the ACC, and they're not expected to fare very well this year joining the conference. They've also got a fairly tough schedule in the conference, which really builds onto that fact. They have to play Louisville, NC State, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Syracuse this year. So that's a pretty tough schedule right there for a team that struggled last season and is expected to struggle this season in a new conference with a lot of travel on their plate as well, might I mention. Couple players to look out for them. Ashton Daniels, the quarterback, this season 36 for 58 on his passing attempts, 384 yards. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception this season, and he also has the most rushing yards on the team with 118 on 26 attempts. So a pretty mobile quarterback right there. He's getting out of the pocket. He's not afraid to run it when he needs to. And I imagine there's a good amount of time where he's forced to by breaks in the O line and whatnot. Also, you've got Chris Davis Jr., the running back, 6 carries for 53 yards. He's got 8.8 yards per carry this season in his one game. You've also got Alec Manor, a wide receiver, 10 catches for 147 yards, 14.7 yards per reception. Ismail Sissi, 11 catches for 96 yards. And Cedric Irvin, 2 catches for 92 yards, which is 46 yards per reception. That might be the biggest number I've ever seen. A really small sample size, but looking at the stats, I guess Cedric Irvin is just absolutely electric and explosive when he gets the ball. So, a couple wide receivers there to take note of with just some crazy yards per reception numbers for all three of them. Then, when you look at the rest of the team, I believe it's Gathan Bernadelle is how you pronounce his name. One of the linebackers, Pac-12 third team, 16 total tackles this season, 1.5 tackles for loss. There's also Jay Green, a safety from Washington, 12 total tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery. And Tristan Sinclair, another linebacker, a Pac-12 fourth team by Phil Steele, and 11 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss for negative 16 yards. Now, I'm not super worried about this Stanford game for Virginia Tech. I think it should be an easy, comfortable win. Really, the biggest concern is probably just the long trip out to California. Stanford is a long way away. That's a tough travel for these guys who are used to being mostly on the East Coast, really not going too much further than like Indiana most of the time, except for maybe one out of conference here or there. But luckily for the Hokies, they do have a bye week the week after this Stanford game, so they can rest up and prepare for Boston College. Now, there's a very, very real chance that Virginia Tech leaves this Stanford game 3-3, which is crazy considering where everyone expected them to be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. I've said it multiple times, but Rutgers scares me, and of course, Miami is a scary game on the schedule as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Virginia Tech, they've got a lot of firepower, and they can also lock down on defense. But once again, we have to see a full 60-minute effort before being truly confident in this team. You just can't rely on them until we've seen it so far. I don't know why, but it seems like several players have either taken a step back or stagnated from last season, and the expectation was at least minor improvements generally across the board. Tech has a lot of work to do before they look like a true ACC contender. They did look better against Marshall, yes, but they were still slow in the first half, and it's not at all what you need to beat a good team like Miami, or honestly, that could lead you to lose to Rutgers. You have got to play the full game in top gear. There's just nothing else you can do. They've had some really, really tough coaching moments as well, where just things were breaking down. I mean, off the top of my head, you think of that Vanderbilt game, 2 number zeros on the field, which cost 3 points. If you get those 3 points back, all else equal, you win that game and you don't go to overtime and lose. And you're sitting 2-0 at the moment, headed into this ODU game. But that's not how things shook out. And they also had just some miscues and some poor moments against Marshall as well. They seemed like a lot less than in the Vanderbilt game. But once again, just a lot of things that need to get smoothed out for this team. You've got to play the full game, and you've got to be polished on the field, which it hasn't felt like that watching Hokies football so far this season. Once they get polished and they play a full game, I think feelings might be a little bit different towards this crew, but we just don't know at this point. We don't know how they're going to look on a week-to-week basis, and until the fan base is given hope otherwise, I don't know what more you can do except for look at it week to week and be a little bit concerned about every game on the schedule until proven otherwise. Now, I'll be breaking down this Old Dominion game once it happens on Sunday, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. And we'll be continuing the schedule deep dive into part 4, 5, and 6. So you will not want to miss what's coming up. And I'm also planning on talking about some Virginia Tech hockey as I'm working with the team and bring on a few guests from there. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a good season and catch the buzz.